Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Veronia, and in today's video we are going to be talking about sinking funds. Now, if you have no idea what sinking funds are, then don't worry, Auntie V is always here for you. So in this video we're actually going to be talking about what sinking funds are in the first place, how I actually use sinking funds to save even more money, and also the mistakes that I see some people doing when it comes to actually creating their sinking funds. And as a quick reminder, this is exactly what I'm going to be talking about this Sunday in my YouTube live. So if you didn't know, I've actually been doing weekly YouTube lives, which are pretty much like mini trainings, really getting you to understand the concepts of personal finance and how you can actually better spend your money, save your money, and also invest your money as well. So definitely make sure you're subscribed to my channel so you don't miss out, as I will be doing this at 7:30 p.m. GMT on Sundays during the month of January. So if you do want to check some of them out, I will link one up here for you and in the description below. And I can't wait to see you there on Sunday. So let's actually talk about sinking funds. So what is a sinking fund in the first place? Well, I've got the trusted Wikipedia definition first, and then of course I'm going to talk about it in my own words. So Wikipedia says that a sinking fund is a fund established by an economic entity by setting aside revenue over a period of time to fund a future capital expense or repayment of a long-term debt. So for me, sinking funds are pretty much expenses that you will end up saving up over time to make it easier for you. Now, when I'm talking about expenses, what I mean are these are going to be expected expenses. So these are things that you basically know you're going to pay for because they are expected. They're very different to actually things that maybe crop up as an emergency or are unexpected, because if you're thinking about that, you're probably thinking about having an emergency fund. So when it comes to actually having a sinking fund, what you're essentially doing is saying to yourself, I know that this expense is going to come up, so I want to basically prepare in advance for it. Now, the reason why I think sinking funds can actually be really useful is because I see that many people will try to save money, but then when expenses end up cropping up, let's say maybe you need to pay for car insurance, because you haven't actually planned for that expense, when it now comes up, either you're going to have to take it out of your current paycheck, which means you have less to spend, or you may have to end up dipping into your savings, which may not be great if you're actually supposed to be saving up for something else. So for example, you may have been using that money to save up for a house, but you're now having to dip into those savings, so your house savings, just because you need to pay for that expense. And so what sinking funds does is it actually allows you to prepare for that expense so that you can basically set some money aside, so you don't have to worry about all of the other savings that you're going to be doing. So for example, if I had a sinking fund for my car insurance, I would basically be putting some money aside for it, and so that means when my car insurance eventually comes up, I have money to pay for it. And if you're liking this video so far, then feel free to give me a thumbs up, as it really does help to support the channel. Plus, I'm sure you know it's free. Okay, so now you know what sinking funds are. The next question you might be having is, great, well, how do I actually start preparing for those sinking funds? How do I actually create a sinking fund in the first place? Well, one of the things I would be doing is actually writing a list of expenses that you think are likely to come up. So these are going to be expected expenses, so things that you've probably paid for in the past that you know are going to come up in the future. Now, one of the mistakes that I see people doing is they don't actually recognize things as expected, or they won't actually recognize things as an expense. So you may have started to create sinking funds for things like your car insurance or maybe your dentist appointment, for example, but there are going to be other things that are going to be expected that you could essentially set up a sinking fund for. So for example, in my case, I actually have a sinking fund for clothes, and so some people may not realize that that could be a sinking fund, but the reason why I do that is because I know that at some point in the year, I am probably going to need to buy a new pair of shoes. Maybe I'm going to need to buy a new winter jacket, for example. And so if I'm able to actually start saving money aside for it early on, what it means is that when I'm eventually ready to buy those new shoes or buy that new winter jacket, I will essentially have money for that. And so I won't actually have to take it straight from my paycheck and become broke during the month, because I would have already taken the time to just save a little bit aside for that particular item. Oh, and by the way, sinking funds doesn't even need to be for boring expenses like car insurance. One of my coaching clients actually has a sinking fund for concerts. Yes, you heard that right. She essentially has been putting aside money for concerts. So what she'll be doing is maybe every single month or every other month, she will put a small amount of money into that sinking fund, so that when she's ready to go for concerts, or maybe her favorite artist is coming to the country to perform, she has money set aside for it, and so she's not going to feel broke when she's actually purchased that concert, because she was already saving up for it over time. So I'll let you know what I say to my coaching clients, for me, when it comes to sinking funds, this can be anything that you like. Really, what you want to be thinking about are what kind of expenses do I want to save up for over time so that I don't have the burden of actually paying the full amount when it comes to payday. So this can literally be anything. Yes, it can be things like car insurance, but it can also be things that you genuinely like or you genuinely enjoy so that you have money set aside and you don't need to feel broke every time you pay for it. Okay, so once you've actually listed out your sinking funds, what you want to be doing is now working out when you're going to pay for it. So essentially what I mean is you need to figure out what are the kind of dates you're looking to actually pay for that expense. So for example, if your car insurance is due every single November and if it's January time, well then you're going to be noting that within the next 10 to 11 months, you'll need to have money aside for car insurance. Now you may not have a set date for all of your expenses. So for example, when it comes to my clothes sinking fund, I don't necessarily have a date in terms of when I actually want to have saved up for something. But what I will say to myself is within the next year, I want to have this amount set aside for clothes. And so that's going to help me understand how much I need to be setting aside every month or maybe every quarter so that I know that I have enough money to basically pay for that expense. So essentially what you would be doing is you would obviously be working out the cost of that expense. So for example, if your car insurance is £1,000 or dollars, and then you would divide that by the number of months you need to save up for it. So for example, in this case, it may be 10 months. So if you divide 1,000 by 10 months, essentially what that's saying is that for you to pay for your car insurance by that time, you would need to be setting aside 100 for each month to pay for that expense. Now, if you feel like maybe doing the maths for each expense might take a bit too long, then I actually do have a sinking funds calculator within my budget template. So yes, it does include a net worth statement, but then it also includes a sinking funds calculator. So all you need to do is pretty much just plug in the numbers and it will do the calculations for you. As well as that, you also have the choice of getting a monthly budget template or a weekly budget template as well. So make sure you check that out if you haven't already. I will of course leave that in the description below for you. So the next thing you want to be doing is actually having a budget. Now, before you start shouting at me telling me, Auntie V, you're always telling me to have a budget, please hear me out first. The reason why I say it might be good to have a budget is because you want to be able to understand how much you can be setting aside every single week or every month or every quarter and figure out whether the income you have will also be able to cover those costs as well. Because what you don't want to be doing is having a list of all of these sinking funds. So let's say you've got to pay for car insurance, but then you want to go to these concerts, but you also want to go on holiday and you also need money for clothes. Plus you've also got the dentist appointment that you visit regularly. If you have all of these sinking funds and you calculate how much you need to be saving aside every single month, you may find that once you've actually done your budget, that your income may not be able to pay for all of that. So what the budget will allow you to do is really evaluate how much is going towards your sinking funds versus your spending versus your essential bills, for example. And so this will allow you to figure out what you might want to prioritize. Maybe you're going to change your spending habits. Maybe you'll decide, actually, I want to be able to increase my income so that I can cover those sinking funds. Whatever it is, that budget will basically allow you to understand whether you can set that money aside or figure out whether there are going to be things that you may need to change in order for you to now pay for those certain expenses. Now, if you do want to learn a bit more about budgeting and how you can actually create a budget that works for you, and also how you can actually manage your money better so you do have money to pay for those sinking funds, then definitely check out my money management guide, because in there I essentially talk about the 6 steps I took to really start managing my money well. So if you haven't checked that out yet, I will link that up here for you and in the description below. But remember, the budget is going to allow you to have a reality check so that you can start evaluating your actions and see what's going to work best for you. Again, your budget is not there to restrict you. So the next thing you want to be doing when it comes to your sinking funds is actually figure out where those sinking funds are going to go. So again, a key mistake I see people doing is that they will actually hold their sinking funds, if they have any, in the same account or in the same pot as their other savings, or even where they actually spend their money. And so why this is a mistake is because if you see all of that money just lying around and you're not really sure what it's accountable for, or you forget what it's actually meant for, you could end up spending it. And so what you want to be thinking about is the sinking funds that I have, so the money that I've set aside for those sinking funds, how can I keep them separate? And so for example, in my case, I actually have different pots set aside for my sinking funds. So for example, I will have a pot for car insurance, another one for holidays, another one for clothes, another one for Christmas presents, another one for birthday presents. As you can see, I have a lot of sinking funds. And so what that means is because I have different pots for each expense, I know exactly what that money is made for. And so for example, if I needed to renew my my car insurance, well, I know to go straight into the pot where it says car because that's what it's been made for. The same with Christmas, because I know this happens every single year. I have a separate pot that's just dedicated for Christmas, and so when it comes to the time of November and December, maybe I'm buying presents or maybe I actually want to go out, I know that I'm going to go directly into that pot. Another thing you could do is, if you find that maybe your bank account doesn't allow you to have all of these separate pots, or maybe it overwhelms you, then you might want to consider actually having a savings account, so a separate savings account or a separate pot just for your sinking funds. So for example, one of my clients actually ended up doing this. So what she did is she would have one separate pot for her sinking funds, but what she made sure to do is actually have a list of all of her sinking funds and how much is going to be dedicated to each sinking fund, so that when she now goes into that pot, she understands how much should be taken out of that pot and for which expense, because she has them all listed out separately. So really the one tip I would give is just try to separate out your sinking funds. So the next thing I would say is just really decide how often you're going to be putting money into your sinking funds. So for you, it could be every week, maybe it's every month, or maybe it's even every quarter, depending on maybe how you get paid and depending on how many sinking funds you have. It's going to differ for everyone. Likewise, there may be instances where maybe you fall into a windfall of cash and you decide to use that for your sinking funds. So for example, maybe you got a bonus at work, maybe you got monetary gifts if you had a wedding, for example, maybe you had some birthday presents and you decide to use some of that cash to go towards sinking funds. Whatever it is, you just want to think more intentionally about it, so that every time you do get paid, or maybe you do have a windfall of cash, you're kind of thinking about what you're going to use that money for. Now, if you're maybe struggling with figuring out how you can actually prioritize your sinking funds, as well as prioritizing other things like maybe your savings and investments, and if that all kind of feels overwhelming for you, then definitely check out my one-to-one coaching program, because essentially what we'll do is map out everything and get you to understand exactly what you're going to be putting towards your savings versus your sinking funds and versus your investments, so that we can create a system that really works for you and doesn't feel so overwhelming. So if you do want to find out more, then of course you can book a free interest call with me. I will link more information up here for you and in the description below. But essentially what you want to be doing is making sure again that those sinking funds are here to work for you. So sinking funds should be making your life easier and not harder. So if you did like this video, then please do give me a thumbs up if you haven't already, and let me know in the comments, what kind of sinking funds have you set for this year? I do post every Tuesday and Friday, so if you would like to know more, then of course you can subscribe to my channel, and I will see you guys on Tuesday.